All right, guys, welcome back. What I thought I'd do in this demo is I was walking around yesterday taking a look at some students' works, and I was, giving some comments, and I always think it's beneficial to go over a student's piece to show you how I might make adjustments or little changes that I might add in. So this is Lexi's project. She was working on it yesterday, and when I came up and she called me over and I was looking at it, there's a lot of positives that I noticed were like a lot of the tone and the values working well. She's getting some really nice transitions here. She's getting some detail on the wrinkles and the skin. The other thing that's working very well, especially on these two, is there's a nice little transition in color. Okay, and I mentioned that in the original demo about having a transition in color and not having something that's completely monochromatic. Okay, so having this little bit of this turquoise, and we go into this little bit of this sort of earthy green is really nice. But something that happens, it's pretty common in student work, is, and it's not just student work, it's even myself, it's in a lot of artist work, is sometimes we're not as daring when we first start out inside the piece. And so something that we can do to get a little bit more daring is we can compile all our layers together and then make some little adjustments, and then go to hue and saturation or color balance and add in or subtract things that we weren't really thinking about. So when I first saw these two here, I thought they were just a little bit dull, and they were a little bit more, they're going towards what we call a muddy background. And that term muddiness is when you get like lots of sort of earth tones and grays mixed together, and it's like a safety place where artists go to sometimes when they're first starting out. And if something gets too muddy, it doesn't really look right because it gets harder to get some reads on it. So I thought I'd walk you through sort of the process of what we did. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, which is a really great approach to your work, is look, she has all these layers right here. If I go turn all these off, okay, she has a base layer, and she has some other information here. One thing that you can do is I can copy everything that's open right now, create a new layer, and then start working on top of it. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder right here. It's this little icon here on the layer section, and if I create that folder, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to label this ORIG for originals. And then I'm going to drop this down. Personally, I'd like to get you guys to try to commit to your layers, and just work on a couple, but that takes a little bit of time and practice. This way you can close something up, and then she has all of her originals there. Then what I'm going to do next is, if I come over here and look, that's her line that she has. Okay, it's at 100%. Okay, so you can see that's one test right there. Oops. That's one test right there that I mentioned to a couple of you yesterday when I was walking around, is it how well when you turn off the line layer. So look at that line on there. Okay, when I turn off that line, how well are the characters holding together? She's rendered this enough and got enough attention to detail in there that it's actually holding together very well. Okay, so you can see the line doesn't even really have to be fully on the outside. She has another line layer, it looks like, that's on. Maybe that's, yeah, it's right in here. Okay, that she's using. So that's sort of a cool approach. She has one layer underneath that she's painting on top of. She has another line layer that she can come back on, and she can even, if she wants to, she can even adjust that color-wise through the selection method that I showed you in the first lecture. Okay, just selecting that line, go entering the quick mask, exiting the quick mask, pasting it, exit the quick mask, and you'd have the line, then she can fill it with a color. Okay, all right, so what I'm going to do now is let's merge all of this onto one layer for her to see. So select all, copy, okay, excuse me, select all, shift control, copy, and then control V for paste. And what I've done now is I've pasted this layer up above. Now Photoshop moved it a little bit, so I'm going to take my arrows and I'm just going to pull it right over on top of the original right there. Okay, so one of the comments that I gave Lexi when I looked at this is, let's punch up the colors a little bit. You're getting a little muddy in here, and this guy's even a little, he's getting a little dark, okay, and he's a little too much. There's some red and pink in there, but let's see what we can adjust. So this is what we sort of came up with. I'm going to show you what we did. See that difference right there? When I come over, that's where we were, which is a little bit more muted and a little bit more flat. And then we came up with those colors right there. We added a little bit more saturation of this guy, and then we adjusted this guy here, and I'm going to walk you through that process. First thing we did was Command-Alt, Shift-Control, Copy, and Paste, and we merged everything on one layer up above right here. Okay, so I'm going to get that in position right there. So the next thing we did is just coming in here and experimenting with some of the options that you have. So if I take the Lasso tool and if I select this guy right here, okay, and I can come over here to Control U. This is a great approach just because sometimes you might be looking at your painting differently, and then making some quick alterations like this, you might really see something that you really like. So now I'm going to come over to Hue first, and I'm just going to slide this hue around and see how I'm changing the colors, and if I end up coming up with something else that I didn't see before. Okay, and when I do this, I sort of look at this and I try to find something that might look, just different or take me on another pathway. If I look at, let's look at the one that I did yesterday. I'm going to mark this one as Phil's because that's the one that we did together. All right, so that one has a lot more, it has a little green in there and it has a lot more red, a lot more color to them. So I'm going to come back down here. Let's go to Hue and Saturation. Let's try to mimic that exactly. So I want a little bit more red in him. Okay, let's come down a little bit more green. I think we ended up somewhere about there. Okay, then what I did is then we went to color balance. So if I go to Control B, what's great about balance is it allows me to add in, either red, green, or blue, or cyan, magenta, or yellow on select areas. So she has highlights in here. So watch, I'm on midtones right now, and if I come over here and I throw in a little bit more red, you see what that just did? Okay, instantly. Here, I'll go back and set that back to 0. Okay, see that? It was a little bit more muted, and then by just grabbing this red slider and putting a little bit more over, I added a little bit more red down in here. Okay, so let's say some of the highlights up there, let's say I want to manipulate those a little bit. Let's see what would happen. What if I put a little bit more yellow into the highlights? Okay, well that blows the character out, right? That doesn't look good because I put way too much yellow. So what if I come down here and put a little bit more yellow into the highlights? It's very light, but you can see a little bit more yellow sort of popped up into some of this area here. So there's nothing wrong with getting in here and sliding around. Okay, now you can see when you put too much and you blow it out, that's completely, all that cyan is taken over the character, and I have lost any gradient control that was in there. Okay, but I might decide to come in there and be like, hey, that's sort of cool. I like that. That one I might just leave at 0. What's cool about moving these sliders is when you touch a slider, if you just press your keyboard, go back to 0, it'll put it back to where it was. Okay, and so again, I can adjust the midtones, highlights, and shadows by doing this continuously. So let's say that's the one that I want. Let's look at the difference. That's where we were, and that's how I modified it a little bit by trying to add a little bit more color to it. And the one yesterday, I don't know, maybe it's just spur of the moment when we sat down, we just happened to both hit it, and we're like, oh, that looks great. And usually the steps that I tend to do is I always mess with hue and saturation first, and then I go to color balance, okay? So and something else to remember in hue and saturation is that if I have this guy selected right here, remember the hue, I talk about having your color oversaturated. I had a couple students that had an animal that looked something like this, where the paint's just too strong. You have to pull down that saturation. Now if you desaturate it completely, you go back down to a tonal set, okay, where it's just working in black and white. So sometimes I might slide this around and get it to, some type of an adjustment. If I press 0 again, it takes me back to where I was, okay? All right, so let's decide. I actually like this version that I did yesterday. We had a little bit of the orange. We had some nice little variations happening in there. It adds a little bit more tinge of color to the character. Okay. All right. So let's go back now. Hold on. Let me see if I can manipulate this guy a little bit more. Sometimes you just got to be very patient. You just got to slide that color slider around, and you end up getting something that you never thought would sort of, like I sort of like that green to yellow there. Now I'll go back into color balance and see if I can put, a little bit more. That added a little bit to the character, What if I try in the shadows? So some of the dark areas in here, I'm now going to add a little bit more blue in there. See that? And that's sort of cool because you don't realize it, but I punched up some of those shadows now. And by using color balance, it's a really great tool, and it's very effective. But you also need to think about what areas you're affecting. Okay, so I like that. Let's try highlights again. What if in my highlights, I sort of like them just about there, okay? And we'll look at the difference, okay? That's where it was before. That's a little bit more adjustment, so there's a lot more color variation in there. And you know what? I did notice it looks a little different on my monitors. Well, let me take a look. Well, I'm looking at the monitor from a side view, and it's a little different color versus if it's straight on. But I've noticed sometimes it looks different on my monitor here because I'm running the images through an HDMI splitter. Sometimes we lose a little bit of quality there, but anyway, so and that's where I was yesterday. And that's where I am now. So now let's come in here. Let's take a look at this guy here. Let's adjust him a little bit. Okay. So that's the beginning part of this lecture. It's all about just adjusting and having fun. So that's what I ended up with, is we had a little bit more green in there, a little bit more fun happening. And there I just felt like that green was getting, if I pull that up on a color picker, to see how it's getting sort of muted. It's just on this area right here. I want to add a little bit more saturation and pull it away from that muteness. I mean, because pretty much anything I swab here, I can tell it's going to be between here and like here. Versus over here, see how that jumped over into the middle right there? It has a lot less black or white values mixed into the color. Okay, this is just very dark. It's dark, dark. It's all right here in this range. So let's see if we can't bring that over. So what I did yesterday, let's hit cancel, is we sort of came up with this. And one of the differences there is look at the color variation now. See how we've jumped over a little bit more? Okay, we're not over in this area here. We've jumped over to here, and just look at the change in this little window right here, of going from here to here, which is where we were, and then moving over into this area. It's a lot more green, okay, and doesn't have the same type of flattening effect with all the darker values. So let's talk about adjusting that guy. First thing, we'll start with Control U for hue and saturation. We come over here. We're going to slide this around a little bit. Okay, oops, hold on a minute. I had the top layer on. There we go. Let's start with what we're looking at here. Control U. So if I slide this around a little bit more. Now, the one negative side is that it's adjusting the spots very quickly. So that might be a reason that if I wanted to go back, I could maybe take some of those spots off and adjust them and move them over onto another layer that sits above it. That way it wouldn't be affecting all of it together. But let's see what we can do. Let's try just moving the hue around a little bit more. I think that's where I sort of like that bit. And then what we did is we come over to the saturation, and just by saturating the character a little bit more, the problem is it is affecting the spots a little bit more because they're already a lot more saturated. Okay, so here, let me show you what I mean by that. Oops, let's do that again. Let's say about there, that's not bad. I just want to pull down the saturation of those spots. The problem is to see when I desaturate them, it's desaturating the color of our guy. So let's find something good in here. Sometimes I just slide over to the side and then lightly just sort of come back and find maybe another color variation that's working. I think pretty much something in this little area right in here is working better, because when I get over here, I think it's too much. Okay, let's start with something about there. Now, this is what I was talking about the saturation. Watch what happens when I bring up the color picker. We're looking at that body. We're still in the gray areas here. But look at that red. It's like, boom, all the way over here to the other side. It's a little oversaturated. So it might be in my best interest, or Lexi's best interest on this, is to actually go in and flatten these down a little bit. And there's two options you have to do that. One, you can copy and paste these onto a separate layer, or you can just come right into your paint right now and you could take a brush, okay, and if we just come in here really sort of lightly and just sort of paint a little bit on top, just by doing this I'm flattening it down very quickly and I'm blending it in a little bit more. And then you can come back up and punch some little areas later. Okay, this way the spots aren't as overwhelming. Then let's go to color balance, okay, Control B, and then let's take a look. You know, what do we want to add or manipulate in here? What if we go to your highlights? What if we throw a little bit more yellow in there? Would that brighten up the character a little bit more? What if we come back down in the shadows, we put a little bit more blue on them? Okay, so you just want to go in there and we want to keep manipulating this, and this might bring it to a second approach that we didn't even think about that we had before. Let me hit OK. Okay, and so that's where I was before. Do you see the difference now? Just those little 5% adjustments. I tell you guys this quite a bit. When you're making these little adjustments, this is the difference between being like a student or an entry level and going to more like a pro. Is some of the pros will make these little adjustments. They make them 5% here, then they come back, they do 5% again, and then towards the end they might do 5%. The difference is you make all those little 5% adjustments and it equals 20%. 25% that you improve part of your character. Because look at what I have now. This is where we were, and look at that. There's a lot that's much more muted, and there's a lot more color happening in those characters right there. And then let's look at the difference from yesterday. When I did this at her workstation, that's what we sort of ended up with, which we liked a lot more. And even going from there to there, do you see that? It's just a little bit more brighter. The hippo is almost spot on to what we were doing yesterday. Okay, but those are just great little adjustments, all right? Now, as far as the line goes, okay, let's talk about that line for a second here. Because if I turn that line on right now, okay, let's talk about adjusting the line here. The line, and let me just turn off all the colors that we have here, okay? The line is black, okay? So if I keep that black line on top of that hippo, okay, it's going to really flatten out part of the colors right now. Can you see that, okay? So her decision to paint this really tight and render it nicely is really working for her because the line isn't going to flatten it out as much. There is a time when we could use the line to our benefit, so let's go back over and talk about changing part of the line color, and we'll look at what we have here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and swab this top color here that she has. That's her base local colors right there. I'm going to make it a little bit darker, okay, like that. And then I'm going to go swab the bottom color right here, which is sort of this value right in here. And then I'm going to make that just a little bit darker too. Okay, so now I have those two colors set up there. What I'm going to do is come back in here. Let's take that lock off of that layer. So I'm going to hit my question mark. It's off. Okay, here, let's deselect this. And what I'm going to do is select that line right now. Okay, that's on there. It's at 50%. Let me pull it up to 100% opacity. Okay. And so we were talking about this. Now what's weird, so you did a little, like you erased a little in here, Lexi, and a couple little spots. That could affect the way that it works, but that's okay for right now. Let's see if we can go through this like we did if I don't have the same computer problems I had the other day. So let's copy that, okay? And then I'm going to go and I'm going to enter a quick mask, okay? I'm going to paste that in there and see what it's doing is it's picking up the negative of the shapes in there. So it probably won't work as well as if you had that filled, okay? Huh?
I think in the original folder that you made, I have...
You have the original?
Yeah.
Let me grab that and I'll just duplicate it.
I think it's layer 2.
Yeah, there it is. Okay. Okay, I'll just grab that up and we'll put that up here. And then we'll turn that guy on all the way. There we go. So we already have some of the line there. Okay, and then what we'll do is turn that off. Some of you had this. Some of you have a really thick line that's really outweighing what you're painting because you got the line too dark. You can't have the line that dark. It's going to kill it. Okay, that's way too bright there. Okay, here, let me turn off. Let's go back here. Let me close this. And I mean, look at that difference there. Some of you guys are working like that and it's just killing it. You have to be able to drop that line down there. So what's really cool is since she's already separated the line based off of the first video, what I can do right now is I just put a line around it, okay, like that. If I hit V, the move tool, and then I hit the arrow tool, it just selects everything that's in there because it's already been separated for me. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is turn that off. I'm going to come over, create a new layer up on the top here. Hold on, I got to bring that up a little bit higher. So I got a new layer there. So I have just the line now. And let's watch. Let's take off all the color. And what I'm going to do, remember I grabbed those colors right there. I have a gradient right here. So if I come over to G right now, grab the gradient tool, and I can come over here and strike a line going across. And I can alter and manipulate. Let me hit H right now so I don't see the ants. So see what I've done? I've actually manipulated part of the line of the character now to fit the paint that we've already done down here and below. Okay, the problem is it's a little bit too light on the top there. So let me see what happens if I come in here and I go to levels. What if I darken that line up a little bit more? Okay, look at that. If I go that way, ugh, all right. So maybe I need to darken it a little bit more, make some little adjustments, tone that down a little bit, bring it down to about 30–40%. Now what I have is I have a little bit of line around the character, but it's actually, I don't even really need it as much right here because she did such a good job of painting this so tight and bringing all her colors together that I barely even need the line to hold the character together. Okay, give me a second here. Yeah, I want to make sure I still had it selected there. So actually, part of me wants to delete that line, and let me go to Control H. And this is what's really cool too about working with line is that I can add in different lines for the character. So I can actually take a brush right now. Look, my selection's still there. Do you see that? So I could take a brush and I could come in here and I could pick some other values. Let's see if I put a little bit more blue into that guy right there. See, I can come in here and start painting some of that line. Let me make sure my brush is at like 100%. And see what it's going to do. I'm doing a horrible habit, which I do in my demos, is I'm using the mouse. Uh-oh, my touch screen's wigging off. There it goes. Okay, so I could lightly come in, see this, and I could sort of paint around some areas that I want to get the line to hold down a little bit. So do you see that? By painting a little bit more on this, getting some of these darker values that she already placed in here, it's just bringing up a little bit of the line on a separate layer. Very lightly, okay? My brush is set right now at 30% opacity. And just by coming along here, I'm actually just changing part of the value set of the line. Now, yeah, I don't see it as much, okay? But if I come in here and if I do this and if I turn these layers off, can you see what I painted in there very lightly? I just added a little bit more value to that. Now, so that's one approach we can use. We could change part of that line color and we could keep coming in here. We could keep painting, okay? And we can modify part of the line and get it to fit the character the way that we want it to. All right? I like sometimes just being able to come in like that and just get a good stroke going on it and then manipulate from there. Okay? But in this character, it's pretty tight where we barely even need that line. That might be benefit for me to just really lower that down, and I could have it supporting in certain areas that I want it. And then when there's areas where I don't need the line, again, sensitivity, right? Thick and thin, contour line. I did a sketch real quick in my sketchbook when I drew that. So if there's something I don't want, I could come in with my eraser tool now at like 40%, and I could come in here, let's say in this part of the body, I don't want that line in there, right? So I can come in here, I'm at like 40, let's go up to maybe 50 or 60. See that? And I'm erasing part of that line quality around there. I can thick and thin areas that I want, that I choose to use or not use. So Control H. Okay, let's just deselect the whole thing. So I'm on that layer right there. And watch, if I come in here and I just keep lightly erasing. So I could get a nice little contour line. See that? I'm erasing a little fold in there, but there's a little bit of line there. I can erase a little bit in here. Okay? So sometimes, depending on your piece, depending on how you guys painted it, you can use that line to sort of wrap around the form a little bit more, and you can start to create these sort of lost and found edges. So you see that? I'm just adding a little bit of detail on there with the line to sort of bring that together. Okay. All right, the last thing I wanted to mention to you guys, I've noticed some of you guys are having a couple of your, oops, I dropped my pen, my Cintiq pen. Some of you guys have this really base color. So I thought I just would quickly go over using some layers to add color into your piece a little bit. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So a great way to do that is if I come down here and select the key paint that Lexi's already painted, and I come down here and I select this. Oops, I missed a foot right there. Okay, and if I hit V again, I hit the move tool. See that? It made a selection for me very quickly around the core paint there, right? When that's done, I could come up and put another layer up above, and I could come in here. Try something different. Let's say you want to have a light source of yellow coming down that's a little bit weird, okay? Maybe we go from this sort of brighter yellow like this, okay, and then we're going to dip down here, and let's say this is going to make a transition into sort of an orange for us, okay? Oops. Let's keep that yellow there, and let's select this guy here. Let's go a little bit more to an orange like that. And then what's really cool is that remember your layer options that you guys have, right? If I come with the gradient tool right now and I do this, you see what it's done? You know, I have a yellow highlight that's coming down that's sort of lightly fading off then into this brown. Well, it's solid right now because the layer is fully opaque, right? But what happens if I come down and put this on like hard light? Okay, see, it just created that little haze layer on there, right? And now what if I dull that down a little bit? So by doing that, see what I just did there? I'm adding a little bit of this sort of yellow haze to the character. And I did that so fast and efficiently just by selecting it, putting a gradient on there, and then dropping that layer down to hard light, okay? And then I drop the opacity down. Now let's take a look at some of the other options. Look, you have vivid light in there. I don't really use vivid. I tend to use overlay depending on the value of what I'm working on. Soft light works pretty good sometimes, and then hard light. And then I don't really use multiply because multiply really darkens the whole image. But you got to remember, if I put that on there right now, what happens then if I come in and if I adjust a little bit of the opacity of the layer? Okay, and so it just depends on your approach. I can add in highlights this way, and I can add in shadows. So that's sort of an additive and a subtractive method that you can work by as well. So let's say I want to add in some highlights here. Maybe I come back and I put this on hard light. Okay, and if I raise the opacity a little bit, you see how I have lots of those little like yellow all over this guy, right? So what I could do now is I could come in here with a soft brush and I could sort of subtract. Let's go back to, oops, I don't know what I did there. Let's go back to my eraser and let me grab the nice soft eraser like this. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to imagine that this yellow is hitting certain highlights, and I might start to subtract little bits of yellow around his face or other areas. So look at what's going to happen here. I'm at 10%, 20% opacity with this brush, and I'm sort of lightly coming in here. Do you see this? And by subtracting some of that yellow, now I'm getting some of that blue to pop out from behind him a little bit. Okay, this is a great way to get the quality, a little bit of reflective light happening in your piece. Okay, it's sort of a subtractive method where now I'm subtracting areas of yellow and letting other areas stay. Okay, just another approach. You have all these wonderful options and layers that allow you to get in there. Down here, I'm not going to have much yellow under that, so I'm going to come in here, might jump up to like 30% and really take back a little bit, even back here on part of his arm. I tend to go for take off from the shadow areas first, and then I come back and build a little bit more. Take off a little bit down here. Let's look at what I've put on there. Look at the difference. So it's a pretty strong yellow little haze there. Maybe I need to come in here, dull it down a little bit more. Okay. Make these little adjustments. But see how quickly he looked just like a base color and didn't have any highlights on him, and then just by doing this, boom, he has some yellow highlights on him. But I still want to come in here. I want to keep erasing areas that I don't want part of that yellow to be hitting. And I'll be constantly changing my brush, adjusting the opacity on how I'm erasing, so I get sort of a natural little gradient, or what I call a little bit of a flow in there. Okay, this is a great way to put some little finishing touches on your character. Now that's one approach, is just doing it on a separate layer like that. You know, another approach would be is I could do this. I could literally, and I mentioned this to a couple of you guys yesterday, I could just create a whole new layer above, and I could just take yellow, and I could come here with my brush, go to a soft brush like this, and then just come in here and just lightly just sort of hit little areas and put little yellow highlights along my character. Okay, hold on a second. Why am I not? Let's try a little bit brighter. Let's try 100%. Why is it not working? Hold on. I have a Photoshop issue here. Maybe it's the recorder. I don't know. I already did that on my keyboard. I hit deselect, and it's just not. So let me try another brush. Let's try this. I'm out yellow. That's why. It went to smudge, and it's not. That I've noticed when the recorder's on and I hit a hotkey, like to go between brush or whatever, it's not. It doesn't do it very quickly, and part of that is because of the memory being used on the recorder, which is okay there. So now I'm back. There's my yellow. See, it showed up there. So now I could come back here. So another approach is, instead of doing that gradient effect and subtracting, I could just come in here and just put a couple little yellow highlights on some areas, and you know, and just use my brush just sort of very lightly. So remember, If I have something that's warm, let me show you what I just did. Look at the difference. See the little warmth that's on the character now? You guys see that? Yeah, hopefully it's visible up there. That little warmth, okay, warm colors come forward, cool colors recede. That's in my benefit to do that. So if I label this warm, and then I can create another layer, and I could call it cool, and I could do the same principle, or if I like, I could come in, and I can grab a cooler color, and then I could come down here and on little areas where I know it's going to be where like the folds are and there's not going to be as much light. And I try to address these as gradients, like a little bit darker and then it lightly flows. A little bit darker and then it flows. Maybe a little bit here, maybe a little bit right here. Some of that comes up around that fold, maybe a little bit down in here, then it wraps around. Maybe a little here. Maybe definitely under the chin right there, there's going to be a shadow area, right? So if I knock that back with a little bit of cools, okay, and this, just adding these cools and these little adjustments are going to make a huge change in my character. It's really going to get some of those colors to get finessed and pop and come forward. Okay, so look at the difference. See just those little shadows, a couple little spots. I still want to come down here then and punch up a little bit more. Maybe I'm just being a little too soft. And then what I do is I'll end up putting too much too fast, which I just did down there. So let me go back to erase. Let's go to like 10%, and I'll just take a little off right there. Okay, but here, let me combine these two layers and let's look at the difference of just adding some cools and warms. So do you see that? So those little adjustments, boom. Pops the face a little bit more, gets you to look in a certain area. And again, you know, that's us coming off from where we started. Hold on a minute, let's go back. That's where we sort of were. We modified the colors a little bit, okay? Got them a little bit more adjusted. We talked about a couple of different approaches, using hue and saturation, using color balance, placing different levels on top, painting other colors on there, okay? Adding some cools and warms, okay? We talked about putting a whole gradient layer on that, and then sort of going into the gradient and subtracting, or it could be, it can be a positive or a negative subtraction process, okay? Or you can just put another layer on it and just start painting some cools and warms as well. Okay, so that's a great way to sort of finalize your characters a little bit. And then something I like to do at the end sometimes is come back in and then just punch up a couple little areas with just one or two like minor sort of little highlights. You know, I might put a little highlight right up here on his lip. Let's just see if I can do that real quick. Because right now, if I look at this, look at my colors. I don't have, everything's pretty low here. I don't have anything that's hitting this upper spectrum right here. Okay, so if I want to keep a nice little highlight like that, here, let me just put highs on there. And there's a couple brushes I like. I like brushes that fade off a little bit, like a texture brush like this one or that one. I think work pretty good. I also like that one. And so when I come in to do that highlight, I might start at like a 50 or 60 grade. And I just might come in here and just sort of, let's see here. Oh, once again, I hit brush. There it goes. I didn't go to brush. I went to eraser. Pain in the butt. Okay. So to get a highlight in there, I just hit this area a couple times. There, I'm at like 70 right now. I drop down to about 40. Okay, and then after that, then I drop down to like 10, and then I just sort of fade it off. Okay. Maybe get a little bit more in this area right here. Go up to about 50. So it's a little bit more noticeable, then drop down to about 20, and then I just sort of fade that area off. I get right in here on this end, and then lightly sort of fade it off. Also, I might come in here and think about a little bit of reflective light. Might have a little bit of light coming back down in here, and then it lightly sort of fades off a little bit. Come back over here a little bit. This comes up, fades back this way. Just a couple little highlights. Don't drown it. I don't kill it. Okay? And even this, I'm like, oh, maybe those are a little too strong. That's fine. On a separate layer. So Lexi might have done highlights before, then I could come back at the very end and sort of build up on top of them again. And since it's on a separate layer, I can look and be like, you know, maybe I made these a little too strong here. That's perfect. And I can come back into erase really quick, go down to like 10%, and then just subtract a little bit from there. Get those to blend in just the way I want them. Okay. And I might even drop it down just a teeny bit like that. Look at the difference. Just a couple little highlights sometimes really adjust and pull the little features out on the character. It's up to you. I think it's a good choice to do because you can define exactly where you want the eye to look. And especially like up in here, if I dull these down, and if I come back over here and I get like a nice little crisp guy up here on the nose. And maybe a guy like right up here on top of the eye a little bit. Fade him off a little. Maybe up here on the ear. Okay. And then I could come in, and again, if I want to lightly blend them in a little bit, I can lightly erase a little. I always tend to make my highlights a little too strong at first, but that's okay. That's part of the polishing phase. So look at that, just that little difference there. Look at the highs. See how they just pop on the face and they just sort of attach, and your eye bounces around a little bit, having those little bits of detail on there. That can be a huge incentive, okay? So between that, adding some cools and warms to the character to get the skin tone to flesh out a little bit. I mean, that's right there a good point about mentioning. Just look at your skin tone. Look at how, your cheeks, they get a little bit red when, they come around the corner. Look at under the eyes and under the nose and the philtrum and under the neck. You get little darker values because those areas are in shadow, right? Try to think about adding that into your character. A lot of times I'll get students who will show me something and they'll be like, okay, I'm done. I'm finished. I'm like, no, you're not finished. You haven't gone over these little details. 5% here, 5% there. And then what I'll do is I'll get to a point, like on this character. Let's merge everything that we've sort of been working on. Okay, let me adjust that a little bit more. It's not bad like that. And here we even had that little yellow layer. Let's just say we decided to keep that in. I like to turn all the layers on and then see how they're affecting. So I'm going to take all of these right now and commit to them. Merge them into one and look at the difference. See where we were? A little bit more muted, a little bit more flatter, and now we have a lot of warmth. We have some yellow highlights. We have some other highlights popping. We have some cool areas coming through. And just a little bit of those little punches add a lot to what we're seeing in the character. Okay, much more muted, much more sort of drowned out, and then here we are after fussing around with it. I feel like there's a lot more life and a little bit more adjustment. I still have a little bit of concern right here on these are really saturated right there. Look at that red. Okay, so I might come in and knock that down a little bit and get those to be a little bit lighter. And it's someone was asking me, what's an easy way to knock down? I mean, there's so many different ways. You could just paint on top of it really quick. I think we were talking about that a minute ago. You can just take a darker value, throw another layer. I'm going to do this with my mouse because it's in my hand. And if I just come in and sort of knock it down. Something else you can do is sometimes you can grab the wand tool and you can select some of these depending on your adjustments here. My tolerance is at 15. Let's see if I put that at 30 right now. If it'll select any of these little areas for me. 30 is working a little bit better. And I could just select those very quickly like that with the wand right now. And if I just go into Control U and just drop the hue and saturation down a little bit more. Okay. Then look at the difference before and after. See how much brighter they were? And now I dull them down a little bit. Okay. Just don't want to get too saturated. Just something to think about. Okay. All right. So it's up to you. So at the end, we look at the difference before, after. Okay. So try to take that same approach on, any of the characters. I think what happens sometimes is when we first start to color, I'd love to talk to a psychologist about this. When we first start to color something, we just need to throw something down because I think the brain works better when you have something to work off. That's how painters work. You have to rough out the canvas and get information on the canvas first and then build up from there and make your decision. So, here we had a lot more blue and now we've got a lot, color, a lot more color variations, a lot more is sort of happening. It's a lot more visually, it's more visually appealing to the eye. And then if I come back in here and even look at what we were doing yesterday, we're sort of stuck between there and there, which isn't bad, somewhat similar. Okay, just we refined this a lot more today. Okay, all right, have fun, and we'll talk in a minute. Oh, we didn't talk about this hippo here. One of the concerns I had about this hippo here is that he's awfully dark on the top. Okay, so if we Sorry about that. Forgot this guy. If we swab this, look at how dark that is. Boom. Almost down there by black. One of the problems going to be is that if Lexi were to keep painting on that, once she gets into some highlights up here, and you get a little bit of a highlight here. Okay, hold on a minute. Let's try that again. There we go. See, just a little bit of a highlight, it's just going to pop out. It's going to be super intense, anything you get on there. Even if I just work really light, just sort of lightly blend in or whatever, it's still going to be just like super intense because that value is so darn dark right there. I mean, you just barely need a 10% grade and it'll pop out. So what I would highly recommend on that guy is I would take this guy and I would adjust him a little bit. The first thing I do is I'd see if I go to levels. Now, Colin pointed out once, there's that option here. Sometimes I like levels a little bit more, but I might lighten the character up a little bit. Okay, I might see if I can adjust his hue a little bit and maybe find something. If I need to desaturate him a little bit. That's a tough one because that value up here is already dark. It's really dark and you just need to really lighten up. And the problem is I like what's happening down here, but if I lighten him up too much, do you see what happens? So that's sometimes where going into levels might be a benefit for you, or curves, because I could come in here and I can manipulate from the center. Sorry, I can't talk today. Manipulate. Here, let me select this guy right now. Let's go back into levels real quick. All right, and let's see if, yeah, just doing that. See what I did? Moving that slider over a little bit. So I haven't really adjusted too much of the darks, but see how that lightened up a little bit? Then I might come under hue and saturation, slide them around. See, I think something like, look at the difference. Even that is a lot more manageable. Not that. Hold on. Too busy sliding. Okay, hit 0, go back to where we were. Yeah, even just like that, I'm at a better approach path right now. Just start working on him. It's not nearly as dark. See if I go to color balance. Let's go to some of the shadows there. See if I throw in a little bit more, a little bit of a yellow tint on him. Okay. All right. So I have something I feel like is a little bit more manageable right there with him now. And if I look at part of that difference, see that? See how much darker he is right there? And then just look at the hue and saturation and a little bit of adjustments on color. He's much more workable right now. I still want to lighten that up a little bit because I still know if I were to look at this as a tonal set, again, put a layer up on the top, right? Let's select black right now. Okay. Deselect. Let's fill this whole entire layer with black right now. Okay. Come over and put this on to hue and saturation. Okay. There we go. And by turning that on and off, I can still see some of the adjustments of that. It's still, he's still a little bit dark in there, but it's not bad. It's a lot better than what it was before. If I click that off, there, see how much darker he was? Huge difference, okay? So again, another incentive of looking at your characters in terms of their value is to sort of see what's happening and where you might want to push up the values, okay? Yesterday I had a couple other students too. They showed me their work and I went through and I noticed this. Like if I bring up the color picker, so every one of you should do this to your piece to double check your values. You should have a full range of values to get your character to read well. And I would pull this up and some people were like, everything was between here and here. That's it. So look at this value here. Boom. That's down low, isn't it? Okay, look at that value. Boom. That's down low. Okay, even this is down there. And then look at that. It's getting a little bit brighter. Look at that. That's getting a little bit brighter. Okay. After I started messing with them, hold on a minute. Okay. If I come back, let me see. I think I have everything on from today. And let's bring this back up. See, look, I have a darker area back in here. See how dark that gets right there? Nice little darkness, and I come over here. Look at that difference. Boom, that's full spectrum. We're going from super dark back here in an area of shadow, okay, right there. And then I come up here to this highlight. Boom, all the way jumps up to the top. Okay, I click down here, much more on the lower side. And then I come back over here, boom, jump back up. So I'm down in this area, I'm back up in here, and then I'm getting up in here a little bit, so I'm sort of bouncing around. That's what I call a nice full spectrum a variation there, versus what you want to avoid is just being here and here. Okay, you don't want to have just all your values be set at a 50, 60 grade to like a 30 grade. Okay? All right, thanks for watching, guys. Be back soon.